guys, Cody here with Mercury Rising Astrology. In honor of Aquarius season and Mercury moving into Aquarius and the new moon this week in Aquarius, I wanted to go over the meaning of Aquarius, the archetypes of Aquarius, where we get the significations and the symbols that we use when we talk about Aquarius, and what it might mean for someone with the sun in Aquarius in terms of their life path, their life purpose, and the principles around which they organize their life. The way in which we derive our interpretations of a sign come from a multitude of different factors that we take into consideration and blend and mix in order to get our final delineation and our final kind of themes of each sign. So some of those factors include the quality of light and darkness of that time of year in the northern hemisphere that sign represents, the modality, which is going to be cardinal, fixed, or mutable, the element of fire, earth, air, and water, its masculine or feminine or yin or yang qualities, and any rulerships of the sign, the planetary rulerships of the sign or exaltations of the sign, as well as any planetary detriment or falls in that sign. So we can take the symbolism of all of those factors, and once we start piecing them together and teasing them out a little bit, we can get a clearer sense on the archetypes that get distilled from that symbolism in terms of each sign. For Aquarius, we're dealing with a masculine or yang air sign that's fixed, ruled by Saturn, and it's the detriment of the sun. The image of Aquarius is the water bearer, so the myth of the water bearer in Ganymede will play a role in some of the symbolism and some of the themes that we discuss. And the quality of light at the time of Aquarius, it's the days are still short, so the nights are longer than the days. However, at the winter solstice, the days start to get longer. So Aquarius is a continuation of the steady increase of light within the darkness. So all of these factors come together and give us the general themes of what Aquarius represents. Let's start by talking about the quality of light versus dark during the time of year in which Aquarius falls in the northern hemisphere. So this will be the winter time, and it's going to be when the days are short still and the nights are long. And so Capricorn marks the winter solstice, where we have the longest night and the shortest day, and the light begins to slowly return out of the darkness and the days get longer. In Aquarius, we have a continuation of the light increasingly becoming longer and longer within the midst of darkness dominating. And so it's almost as if this light is growing in defiance of the dark, and it's gaining strength in small, deliberate increments. And this is the light of persistence, resilience, and the hope that fuels progress even when the external world feels frozen. Remember, this is winter in the northern hemisphere, and in the further reaches of the northern hemisphere, and even in this year in places like Louisiana and Florida, there's snow and it's cold, but there's this feeling of, a little spark of hope, a little spark of progress as we inch closer and closer to the spring equinox, where light will eventually take over. And so Aquarius embodies light as an idea or a principle, a distant beacon or lighthouse that is guiding us forward through the darkness of winter. And so there's this quiet promise that although darkness dominates at this time, the increasing light will triumph and prevail eventually. And so there's a spirit that understands the necessity of enduring the darkness and being within the systems of the darkness while carrying the vision and the ideal of the brighter days ahead. This growing light also carries a kind of defiance or rebellion against the darkness, that even though darkness is dominating, light is still pushing forward and still trying to gain inch by inch some ground. And so there's a belief that this world can and must grow brighter even in the midst of the cold, harsh, dark winters. And this darkness and this winterized kind of motif can just represent entrenched systems or outdated modes of thinking and understanding that might feel stifling or rigid or frozen. And the light slowly increasing brings hope and progress and a new vision or a new eye to the current environment or those outdated systems. Being a masculine or yang sign, there's these qualities that are active and outward oriented versus, the yin or more feminine signs that are more inward or receptive. And because it's an air sign, Aquarius has qualities that are associated with communication, thoughts, ideas, and an ability to connect. Air signs connect things, and all the air signs are considered human signs. So there's this social aspect and this social connection. And so for Aquarius, this manifests as the ability to see larger patterns that link individuals to larger social communities or larger groups, and how those systems and frameworks work to impress upon the individual, but also how the individual can work within and update and rebel against the broader social frameworks as well. Being an air sign and masculine or yang and active, this can link Aquarius to having ideals that they put into action, or having a larger objective social framework and wanting to implement it or to achieve something with it. Aquarius is also a fixed sign, and so this means that it's not fleeting or scattered. It has this crystallization or this structured and enduring quality in the air element. And so this may indicate Aquarius's ability to hold vast concepts and in place and weave seemingly different pieces and disparate parts into coherent whole frameworks that make sense, at least to the Aquarian. And so unlike warm, personable Libra or, fun, curious, lighthearted Gemini, Aquarius is more impersonal and detached, and its connections are more intellectual and principle driven. They have ideals that they want to achieve, and they see the bigger picture and they see the broader social dynamics, not necessarily the one-on-one kind of, social interactions that Libra kind of may favor or may indicate, and not the, scattered kind of fun information gathering that Gemini indicates, but it's almost like a fusion of the two, in a sense that how can we take social interactions and information and create coherent frameworks and systems that reflect an ideal way of operating or being? And so Aquarius thrives in the realm of visionary thought and innovative frameworks that change and update outdated systems or challenge the status quo to be better, to live up to something greater. In traditional astrology, Saturn is the ruler of Aquarius. Modern astrologers will say that Uranus is either co-ruler or ruler of Aquarius, but the ancients had a system that was perfectly symmetrical and beautifully self-referential and integrated, that I think adding the outer planets as rulers of the signs kind of muddies the system and kind of honestly makes it a less beautiful system. It fucks with the symmetry. So I don't use modern rulerships in terms of signs. That doesn't mean there's not some sympathies or correlations that we can draw between the outer planets and the signs, but for the sake of beautiful simplicity and the symmetry that the traditional rulerships bring, I use the traditional rulership. So that's going to be Saturn for Aquarius. And so Saturn carries this weightiness, this gravitas of discipline and responsibility and structure. And it demands accountability and forethought and kind of challenges Aquarius, you know, their lofty ideals and challenges their intellectual pursuits to be grounded in something that is real and more tangible. Um, Saturn represents the restrictions that define and preserve order. And in ancient times, it was the guardian of the threshold because it was the furthest planet that we could see with our invisible eyes. So it was the threshold between all of the other moving planets, or the wandering stars, as the ancients called them, and the realm of the fixed stars, or the divine. And so Saturn was this threshold between order and movement, and the inner and the outer. And so that's where it gets its, rulership over things like boundaries and walls. It's because it's the outermost planet. And so with those themes of being associated with the threshold, with, masculine air, Aquarius represents the threshold of thoughts and innovation and trying to recognize the limit of current systems and how we can direct ourselves towards progress and reform of those systems, not only in a way that benefits the individual, but the collective. And because Saturn was associated with this idea of a threshold and navigating between the seen and the unseen and the realm of the moving stars and the fixed stars, Saturn was also associated with things like the mystic or the sages or the shamans or anybody that's a seeker of wisdom that is at the boundaries of consciousness trying to learn more or to understand on a deeper, more profound level. And so Aquarius is standing at the threshold of the old and new ideas and visions for the future versus visions of what exist. Like the mystic, the Aquarian path is often solitary or misunderstood. And so another kind of signification of Saturn in ancient texts is like the scapegoat, because what exists at the margins or at the boundaries, it's usually things that, are outsiders or weirdos or eccentrics, because they're not necessarily in the mainstream, they're at the fringes. And so as being a ruler of threshold and boundaries, it rules not only those things inside the boundaries or inside the society, inside the structures, but the things that are also outside the structures and outside of the boundary. So for Aquarians, this can indicate seeing things that the collective can't see, or seeing things that the collective can't quite understand yet. And so there's this refusal to conform to societal expectations because they see things a little bit differently from an outsider's kind of perspective. And so, or even just because they have a higher ideal and they hold themselves to maybe a higher standard of what things should be. And so this threatens the established order, and so they can be kind of marginalized or pushed aside, and Aquarians can feel alienated, or they can be perceived as eccentric or the weirdos. Saturn also represented things like clowns, and so, although Aquarians can be admired for their, out of the box, innovative thinking, there's this tendency for them to also feel like they don't fit in or misunderstood. Even amongst their peers, there may be this quality of not quite being normal or not quite being understood when you express yourself. I have an Aquarius moon, Mars, and Venus, and my North Node is also in Aquarius. And no matter where I am, there's always this unsettling feeling of not belonging. And it's something that I've had to kind of reconcile and work with my whole life. And even when I know that I'm loved and I know that people want me around and that people like me and want to, hang out with me in whatever situation, whether it's work or friendships or relationships or whatever, there's still this underlying feeling of being an alien or being, somehow isolated and detached. And now we'll get in a little bit later on some of the reasons why it's maybe hard for Aquarians to emotionally engage, but there's partly because of Saturn's rulership of this masculine fixed air sign, there's this feeling of standing at the boundaries of things. And when you're at the boundaries or fringes of things, especially intellectually or ideologically, um, in terms of how you view the world and the collective, it can be an isolating or alienating kind of experience. Now, another thing that can lend itself to this feeling of being, alienated or feeling like a foreigner is that in ancient astrology, the sign opposite of the sign that is ruled by a planet is what we call their detriment. So for Leo, the sun rules Leo, and so the opposite sign of Leo is Aquarius. And so when the sun is in Aquarius, the sun is in detriment. So this is like being in a foreign place. If you think of Leo as like the home of the sun, when it gets around to Aquarius, it's the furthest away that it can be from home. And so this isn't necessarily a bad or good thing. It's just a different thing. If you're at home, you have all the resources, you know where everything is, you know where the toilet paper is, you know where the water is, you know where the utensils are, like you know where everything is, and you can move around in a way that's comfortable. You chose everything in your house, you purchased it for certain reasons, you put them in certain places. It's comfortable. It's you have all the resources and everything you need. When you travel, to Thailand or Tibet and you're on the other side of the world, staying in an Airbnb that you just booked, you don't know where anything is. You have to figure it out. The language is different. The food is different. The, creature comforts are different. And so that's kind of like the vibe of a planet in detriment. And so we can see how, because if the sun rules things like the ego and the individual glory and self-expression and authenticity on an individual level, the showman, what's the furthest thing from that you could be is somebody identified with the collective who loses their sense of ego, who, identifies with larger, broader, bigger ideals than just the personal kind of expression that we find in Leo. And so this can add to that feeling of, foreignness or being out of place with Aquarius, because that's the sun's detriment. And so the personal ego can be subordinated to higher ideals or collective principles. And so the sun here is not driven so much by self-interest necessarily, or admiration and applause just for the sake of expressing, as much as it's driven by a deep sense of purpose and intellectual pursuits and broader concerns, and maybe wants to be recognized for their ideas and how they see the world and the structures in which they want to affect change, rather than just an individual expression of, authentic warmness. And so Aquarian suns can shine as a beacon for others, or ideals, and lead us into a future that's brighter. The sun in Aquarius doesn't shine through expressive emotional warmth, but through more of an intellectual clarity and through visionary ideals and talking about, theories and ideas and playing around with thoughts and structures and frameworks of society and what should be and shouldn't be and what's the ideal and what's not. And so it's not about necessarily drawing attention to oneself in Aquarius as it is about illuminating truths or revealing and recognizing patterns that challenge existing paradigms and structures. Because the sun is the furthest it can be, and also think about the fact that it's winter time still, this adds a distance and a coolness to the sun's expression in Aquarius, especially given that we talked about Saturn's rulership, and Saturn is the most distant planet in the sky. So again, there's this feeling of, aloofness or objectivity that can make the typical, the sun wants to shine, the sun wants to radiate, the sun wants to be warm and inviting and express, but there's this distance or this hesitation to get involved in that on an Aquarian level. They're much more interested in ideas and thoughts and making connections and theories and things like that than they are being warm and emotionally expressive. For Aquarians, this creates a tension between wanting to stand apart and stand out and be appreciated for who they are, but also serving the broader collective and achieving and aiming at the higher ideals that they have for themselves. And so over time, An Aquarian will learn that true individuality is not standing out or being different, but it's contributing in a unique way with a unique perspective to the whole that makes things better and contributes in a way that is progressive for everyone, not just for the individual. The image of Aquarius is the water bearer, and I think the myth of Ganymede, the Greek myth of Ganymede, can shed a lot of light on kind of the themes associated with Aquarius through a mythic lens. So Ganymede is a young, beautiful, ideal, you could say, looking young man who Zeus, the god associated with Jupiter, same thing, abducts and brings back to Olympus to pour out this sweet nectar for the gods. And so this shows a complex kind of dynamic between humanity in Ganymede and the divine in Zeus and the gods. It's interesting that Ganymede is a mortal that is elevated up to the status, not quite of a god necessarily, but like he comes from the earth and is abducted and is elevated into this divine realm of Olympus. And so this can add to the symbolism that they're an outsider or that they're ahead of their time or they feel maybe unconventional or different or picked apart from the group for different reasons. And so in being up in Olympus, you know, separated from humanity in a sense, there's this higher perspective, but it brings this sense of isolation and this sense of detachment that, you know, you've been singled out from the group and brought up into this place where, you know, not every mortal gets to be. And so that can feel foreign and alienating and detached from where you came from in your history. So there can be this tendency for Aquarians to disregard the past and traditions and where they came from, and no matter how helpful they are, and throw them away and throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, for more progressive ideals or more futuristic oriented, you know, progress. But it's important for Aquarians to remember that they wouldn't be where they are without the past, and they wouldn't be where they are without tradition that have led them to this point to be able to rebel against the infrastructure and the frameworks of society and the systems in order to, you know, innovate and in order to change and bring progress. And so it's very easy for Aquarians to polarize. I mean, Saturn is the ruler of oppositions, and oppositions indicate polarization. It's very easy for Aquarians to polarize between, you know, this utopian ideal and everything in it is awesome, and kind of shitting on, you know, everything that's not the utopian ideal. And so it's very important for Aquarians to bridge that gap. And I think Ganymede pouring out the waters, you know, is indicative of that. It's like, okay, you can contain this wisdom and knowledge, but you need to be able to pour it out in a way that nourishes and fertilizes. Ganymede being youthful and beautiful and virtuous, you know, this signifies ideals raised up to a higher standard and something to aim at. And with Saturn being a rulership here and having those ideals and something to aim at, that infers a sense of responsibility and accountability to use those ideals and those divine visions that you have for innovation and progress for the greater good rather than selfish aims. There's also a tendency for Aquarians to feel like they are better than or on this kind of moral high ground, or, you know, they may even lack compassion or empathy for the humanness of things because they feel like they've had this revelation or these ideas that a lot of people don't understand quite yet or don't necessarily see the way they do. So it's important for Aquarians to remember that. So I've already kind of started it a little bit, but I think it is important to talk about some of the shadow aspects of Aquarius. That same kind of detachment that allows them to see things logically and objectively and from kind of like an outsider perspective can lead to isolation, alienation, and emotional distance or coolness. And while that's good for coming up with problem solving, you know, ideas, or seeing the big picture and being involved with the collective themes, it can be difficult for an Aquarius to connect on a one-on-one, more emotional or relational level. They can lack a compassion or empathy for the smaller human, trials and tribulations at the expense of looking at the big picture. Something that comes to mind is like, again, I have an Aquarius moon, Mars, and Venus, and I've had to be careful that when people come to me with challenges or come to me with, tribulations that they're going through, that I empathize with them and try to connect with them on their level instead of, I have a tendency to automatically go to this place of like, well, what does this mean? Like, what can this teach you? Like, think of the bigger picture. Like, how does this fit into, like, zoom out a little bit instead of really just embodying the challenge or the feelings or the emotions. I have this tendency to look at, like, how does this fit to the bigger picture and how can we justify this emotional, experience in a larger framework of existence that makes sense. And if you're dealing with an Aquarius, that might work great. But if you're dealing with, any of the other signs, especially water signs, that's not going to fly. There's this balance that needs to be struck for Aquarians between living in this mental realm of like, how does everything fit, and embodying and process emotions in a way that's like heartfelt and real. And so that's one of the kind of, shadows of Aquarius. They can also struggle with impatience, frustration, or even arrogance, thinking that they see this big picture or all these connections and these structures while everyone else is focused on like these smaller petty problems. And so that's something also to kind of keep an eye out on if you're an Aquarian or dealing with an Aquarian, is although your visions are grand and awesome and there's often an ideal behind them that does strive and seek for the greater good, people see things differently and people come at things from different perspectives, and that doesn't make you wrong and that doesn't make them right or them wrong either. So being mindful of that as well. Despite their reputation for being free thinkers, it is a fixed sign. And so there's this potential that they can harden their ideas and their ideals into a dogmatism, and that the structures that they want to dismantle out in the world in the social sense can be a mirror towards the unconscious structures that they themselves have built within themselves that are no longer serving their highest good and need to be dismantled themselves within themselves. That's a lot of within themselves, but I think you get what I'm saying. Their need to, analyze and pick apart structures in the world can be a distraction from them looking within to see what structures and mental models do I have within my world that need to be adjusted or need to be questioned or need to be figured out. Like a sense of humility and a sense of like, I don't have it all figured out, even though it seems like I do, and I can make all these really cool connections and kind of explain things in a way that makes a lot of sense. There might be something I'm missing, even on like not only on the external, but maybe even on the internal. There may be a conflict between wanting to stand out and be recognized as an individual, but they don't want to seem self-centered, because at the end of the day, they do want to serve this ideal of a greater good. And so balancing this personal light and this personal individuality with a commitment to the social whole is something that the Aquarian might struggle with. Rebellion and going against the grain and standing out just for the sake of it without any direction, being a contrarian just to be a contrarian, not to further the greater good or not to make progress, can be a shadow side of Aquarius. Also, we've talked about it a little bit, an over-intellectualization of things and a difficulty accepting emotions, not only within others, but within themselves. This can be a problem because it can lead to repressed emotions, and those repressed emotions can come up at almost any time and be unexpected and, come up in ways that are kind of destructive and erratic. So being mindful of, again, being able to process the mental realm with the emotional realm. And lastly, there is a burden of responsibility that, Aquarians put upon themselves. Any Saturn ruled sign, that you can see this with Capricorn too, but it's a different way. And In Capricorn, it might be this ability to achieve something, like a lasting legacy, achieve something out in the world, a career or a mission, and you're going after the mission and you're climbing that mountain. For Aquarius, the burden of responsibility comes, from being a reformer or a visionary intellectually, like using, you know, those fresh ideas and those fresh perspectives that you have in a way that, effectuates change. But change can be slow. And again, like we talked about, people may not catch on to what you're putting out there. And so there can be this feeling of being burnt out or frustrated with the world at times. And again, this can be lonely. You're standing at the forefront of change. You're standing on the fringes of progress, and it takes a certain kind of tenacity and a certain kind of perseverance to do that just not everybody has or is supposed to have. We're all here for different reasons. And so there's this kind of burden that, Aquarius can bear intellectually, especially if they feel underappreciated or they feel like they're not understood. So there's kind of my overview of Aquarius and how we arrive at some of the themes that Aquarius represents. Ultimately, Aquarius is the visionary reformer. It's the outsider who dares to challenge the status quo, not for individual aims necessarily, but for collective progress and the collective good. Ruled by Saturn, it balances rebellion with responsibility, trying to ground the lofty ideals that it holds into practical frameworks that endure and stand the test of time. As the water bearer, it pours out wisdom and innovation, offering its gift for the betterment of humanity, if you will. There's often a misunderstood or feeling like an outsider, but this can spur an Aquarian to take on the responsibility and the burden of, inspiring change and connecting with the collective and illuminating a brighter, more equitable future. Being able to be an individual, not in the sense of, hey, look at me, look what I can do, but being an individual in terms of being in service in a unique way to the greater good. So you can see how some of the themes of technological innovation or progress and ideological frameworks that, challenge the status quo and challenge tradition. You can kind of see how all these things that we've talked about, being an air sign, being fixed, being masculine, being the domicile of Saturn and the detriment of the sun, the time of year where darkness dominates but the light increases. You can see how all of these come together to kind of give us these visionary, optimistic, hopeful, collectively inspired themes of Aquarius. One thing I didn't touch on that I will touch on briefly is its association with like aliens and extraterrestrials. I think it's kind of clear based on what we talked about how that might fit in. I mean, if you just take the myth of Ganymede, you literally have the divine coming down and abducting a mortal and bringing it back up. That's the perfect analogy for, alien abduction. And again, Saturn being the ruler of things like thresholds between, things that are unknown and the things that are known. That can also indicate, this affinity towards aliens and extraterrestrials. And also just the sense that Saturn rules things like the outsiders. Like, well, if we're the insiders, then what would the outsiders be, right? Perhaps extraterrestrials. I don't know. I just felt like I couldn't do an Aquarius video without mentioning aliens because they do have an association with Aquarius. So that's kind of what I got for you for today. As always, look at the house placement that Aquarius rules in your natal chart, because that's where you're more likely to see Aquarian type themes, come up in your life. Is it in your home and family? Did you come up with an unconventional home life or unconventional parents? Is it in your relationships, seventh house, career? Look at the house placement and see kind of where these Aquarian themes and these Aquarian archetypes show up for you. Comment below on what planets you have in Aquarius, what house it rules for you, and how you see Aquarian themes coming up in your life. We've got Pluto that just moved into Aquarius. We got Mercury moving into Aquarius. got a new moon coming up in Aquarius. We got a lot of Aquarius energy, so I felt like this was an apt time to record an Aquarius video. As always, like this video, it helps. Subscribe to the channel, it helps. And I'll see you guys later.